Hey there, what I see is people letting their businesses run their lives versus them leading their business to love their life. I see this in corporate jobs, and I see where we step into expectations that other people have of us that do not honor us and allow us to lead our own life. Welcome to this episode, and I'm glad you're here to listen.
From the corners of my mind is where I find my sanity.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Lead Your Life with Debbie Heiser. This episode is going to be jam-packed with a couple of things. We are on the final universal law, which my chief community builder, Sarah, is going to be really happy because she keeps bugging me about the law of rhythm. And that's what we're going to talk about today. She has been having a rhythm of reaching out to me and saying, don't forget to do this one, don't forget to do this one. So I'm really glad this one is wrapping up the year as we look into 2023. And then we're going to talk about the intentionality of words. And I'm going to follow up just a little bit from the episode previous to this. So last week's episode, if you didn't listen to it with Erica Barnhart, please go back and listen to it. It's about communication. And one of the things that she talks about, or that we talk about together, is that words have meaning. And, like words are they really matter. And that words are matter, that they have their own energy vibration to them. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that and what that means in 2023. But let's talk about the law of rhythm. And everything in the universe has a rhythm. Everything's moving in and out, up and down, to and fro. And there's a rhythm. And if you think about even the earth itself with the two poles, there is a rhythm that goes. So think about even the ocean, how the waves are kind of, I don't know what's the word I'm looking for, controlled by the moon. And so there's a rhythm to them. And even if I was just out in California, so I'm taping this just right after Thanksgiving, and I was just out in California, we were at Newport Beach, and these waves that were coming in were so beautiful. And have you ever noticed, like I typically count sevens, it's not necessarily always the case, but you can see the waves starting to roll in, and some of them are smaller, and then they get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And by the time the last one is there, there's a little bit of almost like a little pause in between. And then here comes another set of waves. That's another example of rhythm. Now, this is true of everything. So it's true, including our businesses. I'm sure many of you that own a business or are in an organization, working professionally in an organization, there are rhythms to a business. I remember working at Citibank, and in the credit card industry, there were rhythms. There were more purchases that happened around the Christmas time, around the holidays. There were more people calling in, making payments in collections right after taxes because they were getting their tax returns and making payments to their credit cards. When you think about the mortgage industry, there were more people were buying homes in August and September because of school starting. And so we saw a rhythm with that business. And the same holds true with any other business. Now, one of the things that I've tended to see as a rhythm that people do culturally is towards the last quarter of the year, in November and December, they slow down. It's like a slow down period. And I think it's just the opposite, because when we slow down, the law of cause and effect says for every cause, there is an effect. And what happens is there's usually a cycle that goes with this rhythm, that if I'm not connecting with people and I'm not out there marketing myself, then my sales are going to slow down a few months later. That's a rhythm that we get into. There's also rhythms that happen with our energy. So many of you may notice, like I always find this time of year, I catch up on my sleep a little bit because where I live, it gets dark. It's 4 o'clock right now and it's almost dark outside, and it gets dark really early. And so my rhythm, as far as my activities that I do outside of work, tend to slow down a little bit. And then come January and typically the end of December, I have a rhythm where I know I go skiing on certain days. I have certain days that are my creative days. I have certain days that I see clients. And I've created a rhythm in my business, a way of how I do that business. Now, some of those rhythms are also within buying cycles. So if you have a manufacturing business, you might see an uptick of sales. That's a kind of a theme that happens every year. That's a rhythm. When it comes to your energy, the energy also, some of you are nighttime people. Like I have one sister who she can stay up super late. I don't know how she does it because I struggle with it. And I'm a morning person. And so my rhythm is I get up typically between 5 and 6 and I do my things. Now, part of the rhythm that you've also created for yourself is when you get up in the morning, right? There are certain things that you do that you just don't even think about anymore. So I think about, okay, I get up from my bed and I've created a new rhythm because I purchased this Beamer, which is a bioelectric feedback thing that sends pulsations through your body to help your blood circulation. And so I typically roll over and lay on that for 8 minutes before I get up. And then I get up and I do my workout. And then I get up and I brush my teeth and take a shower. You know, like there's certain things I know, even for me, if I end up washing my hair before I wash my face, it kind of messes with me the rest of the day because I've gotten into a rhythm. There's a flow of things, right? Now, this also happens with your moods. There are times that you might find that, like, I know for me, when I travel, and I travel quite frequently, that usually the day or two after I get home, I feel like there's a little dip in my energy, a little dip sometimes in my mood, because I'm trying to get unpacked, get settled back in. My routine, my rhythm has been messed with just a little bit. And so that's how that plays out personally. Now, also within a focus, right? Like talking about morning and talking about nighttime, my focus is best early in the morning. So I know, like when I got my master's, I got up at 5 every morning. I set my alarm for 7, and for 2 hours, I studied in the morning. And that's just my rhythm of how I got it done. Same thing with when I wrote papers. I would write papers on the day they were due. I did other things through the 2 weeks prior to keep myself organized. But then I would have this rhythm where I'd get up, I'd write the paper, cite it, and do everything and turn it in all on the same day. Now, some people would call that procrastination. I say I would have rewritten the paper 3 times because I was still gathering data. So that's a whole nother podcast. But when we talk about this law of rhythm, there's an internal circadian rhythm that you have too. Many of you may wake up in the middle of the night. Google it's really fascinating. Like I would wake up at 3 o'clock and that would tell me that my liver was trying to regenerate and there was something going on with my liver. And so there are things that happen that we wake up at certain times, we fall asleep at certain times that create this rhythm for us. And when you think about rhythms, whenever you go against a rhythm, that creates friction, that creates obstacles. And so sometimes it's working with that rhythm. So working within yourself, right? Like it took me a while. I had a story about work that I needed to be at work Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. And that's just how it was. And that's how it was for years when I worked as an executive at Sprint and an executive at Citibank. And so when I think about my own rhythms, that changed. And so sometimes you work with the rhythm because it's a created rhythm that you have certain boundaries set up around. And sometimes you have the opportunity to then create your own rhythm when it comes to your energy level and cash flow. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. And so when you think about setting up your own energy, think about and answer these questions. When are you the most productive typically? When do you feel like things just flow pretty easily for you? When do you find that your mind is the most engaged? And when do you tend to get the most things done? Now, I will tell you too, like these shift over time. When I had my son and he was small, it was a little bit different situation. When he got older, we had a little bit different flow. When I moved here, and we have shoulder seasons, and summer is really busy because it gets light at 4:30 in the morning and doesn't set till 11. And so the rhythms somewhat change. Another rhythm that I never paid attention to until I lived up north was the summer and winter solstice. And that's when the days start to get longer or shorter. And that in and of itself is a rhythm, right? Based on the axis of the earth. And some of you live in some places that that doesn't happen. So when you think about your own energy, answer those questions, because that will tell you if there are certain things I know that for me, I am most creative and most productive in the morning. I am most creative on a Monday and typically a Friday. Like I get a lot of things done on a Monday. So I guess productivity would be a piece of that. And Thursdays and Fridays, I tend to be a little more relaxed. And so my creativity, my innovation tends to come in a little bit more. And so knowing that, I purposefully have scheduled my clients on certain days. Now, I'm shifting that a little bit as ski season comes around, because I like to ski Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So I have days in between. And I don't typically ski on Saturday because there's way too many people on the mountain. And that allows my body to recover. And so now I'm shifting that rhythm just a little bit, and people will start to see changes in my schedule. So there's ways that you can use that rhythm to work to your advantage. Now, the other thing is with cash flow. If you own your own business, you know there are ups and downs, and you have a baseline minimum that maybe you've reached a point where you're making 10 grand a month, or maybe it's 25,000 a month. And that was what you were shooting for, but now that becomes your norm. And so that changes. And as you change that, it's looking at the rhythms of your business to see when the ups and downs are, right? Like my monthly cash flow is higher when I get ready for events because I'm selling tickets to events. The month after the event, my expenses are higher because I'm paying for all of the things that the event had in play. So knowing those things, that allows me to work with the law of rhythm to look at it and say, okay, if I know that my cash flow is stronger here, but some of that money is being put away to pay the expenses for the event, and I have expenses during the event, what can I do after an event to create cash flow? And it's just simply asking yourself that question. Now, some of you might go, oh, that seems too simple, but here's the deal. It really is just that simple. And it's figuring out how can you create that cash flow. And a lot of times my clients, I tell them they really need to have an understanding of where they're at. And I have one client, it's so cute, even though I haven't seen her for a couple of months and she's doing a different program starting in January, I constantly am saying, how many people did you see? How much money did you make? What was this? To keep her focused on those numbers, because if you know, like I have an annual goal, if I know that I'm only a certain amount away from that annual goal, then I can make concessions back in September to then make that annual goal at the end of the year. And that's why it's so important to know that and understand that and work with those rhythms, right? Nothing drives me crazier than when someone says, oh, if you want to, I'm just doing this for math because I would suggest a lot higher than this, but oh, if you wanted to make $120,000 a year, just divide that by 12. Well, that doesn't work for every business. And so what I'm suggesting to you too is to figure out, if you're looking at a goal for 2023, an annual goal for your business, to think about that annual goal and then look at the rhythm of your business. What are those rhythms telling you? When do you tend to bring in cash flow? When is cash flow a little tight? I've talked to a lot of people that December seems to be a tight cash flow. Now, I think some of that is people are spending for the holidays, but also people aren't doing things that they would typically do because everybody's in the scurry hurry of the holidays. So if we know that, we can plan up front to do the things that we need to do in order to then have a more steady cash flow across the year. So with that in mind, just think about what those rhythms are. Notice the rhythms. You know, nature is a perfect example of looking at things. Now, if you live closer to the equator, you don't have this necessarily, but there are certain seasons. And if you live in New Zealand, you are approaching your summer. If you live in North Idaho, we have almost 3 feet of snow on the ground to prove that we're in winter. So there's these seasons, there's cycles within different species. There's gestation periods, which are also rhythms. So just notice these rhythms and try to work with them instead of against them. Another rhythm that I mentioned earlier is that when people feel like they are procrastinators and they judge themselves for that and make themselves wrong. And what I would suggest is to step back and say, am I really procrastinating? Or I'm a big Myers-Briggs. I am certified in Myers-Briggs. And one of the things, the last letter talks about how you approach the world and how you structure yourself according to make yourself successful. And the preference that I have now, I fake a J, meaning I have a lot of structure. I have a color-coded calendar. And I do that because I'm involved in many, many things. And I have to have that structure for me to be successful in those things. But my preference is to gather data, right? To be open to possibilities. So literally, if I would have written my papers the week before, or even 3 days before the day it was due, I'm still reading things, because we had to write papers almost every 2 weeks. I'm still reading things that are data points that I want to include in that paper. And so therefore I'd end up rewriting it. And so that's not procrastination. That's me knowing my rhythm, knowing that that's how I work best. Now, I also have learned, and it's important to have balance in this way, to work with my rhythms. If I have a larger project, to chunk it out and work on certain pieces of it during a certain amount of time, work on the other pieces of it during a different time, and have that chunked out. What I also did during my master's, and this is just a good example of it, is I would go through, and if I had to read 2 books in those 2 weeks, I would calculate how many pages that was, and I would divide it by the 14 days, or actually 13 days, because my paper needed to be written on that Saturday. And I would figure out how many pages I needed to read every day, so that I knew exactly what I was doing when I got up at 5 a.m. and my brain wasn't necessarily completely awake yet. And I knew exactly what I needed to do. So I was working with my rhythms, knowing that I could read and understand that. But if I had to sit there and figure out what I needed to read, I wasted time. And then I would wait until I gathered all my data to write the paper. So enough on that, but just wanted to give you some examples of how that works in your life. Now, the second part of this that I want to talk about, because it's the last one of the year, I can't believe it. 2022 is almost over. I'm really big on thinking about a word. I've stopped writing New Year's resolutions a long time ago. And what I do is try to be really present, try to think about a word that I want to have for 2023 that would encompass what I do, that creates mindfulness in me. Mindfulness might be a word that you choose. I've seen people choose joy. I've seen people choose vulnerability. I've seen them choose unstoppable. Whatever that word is for you, give some thought to that and pick a word that then helps you look at things as you go forward of, let's say your word is joy. Does this bring me joy? Yes or no? And if it doesn't, ask yourself why you're doing it. There may be a good reason, but ask yourself why. And then as you look at it too, like I think about the word vulnerability, I think that might be my word for 2023. I'm still kind of gestating on it. But if vulnerability is it, then as I'm looking at things in 2023, I can say, am I opening up and being able to receive and being vulnerable? Am I sharing what's on my heart, or am I staying in my head? So those are just some examples of how words matter and words are matter, and how they have an energy themselves that create a rhythm for you. So pick out a word. I would love to hear in the comments what words you've picked out. And with that, 2022 is a wrap, folks. I hope everybody has a fantastic New Year's Eve and a safe one, and we will see you in 2023. Thanks so much for listening.
Find your own kind of happy.